The young woman telling the story works as a helper for Mrs. Van Hopper, a rich and bossy lady who loves gossip and poking into other people's lives. While they're staying in a fancy hotel, everyone starts talking because Maxim de Winter has arrived. He is one of the most admired men in London, the owner of the famous Manderley estate, and his wife had died only a year ago. Just hearing his name makes the hotel guests whisper in curiosity. Mrs. Van Hopper becomes excited and wants to meet him. To make her employer happy, the young woman tries to get Maxim to sit with them. She even slips money to the waiter, but in her nervousness, her purse falls and coins scatter loudly across the floor. Embarrassed, she bends down to collect them. A man nearby hears everything and warns her that Maxim is not someone easy to approach. His words make her feel very small. But then the waiter calls the man Mr. de Winter. She realizes, with horror, that the man who overheard her was actually Maxim himself. At lunch, Mrs. Van Hopper tries hard to keep Maxim's attention by talking about useless things, clearly just wanting to be seen with him. She even asks the young woman to bring photos of her nephew. The girl gives the photos quietly, but doesn't return to the table, too embarrassed to face Maxim again. Later, Mrs. Van Hopper and her friends laugh at her, saying she lost her confidence just because a man was around. The next morning, Mrs. Van Hopper feels sick and stays in bed. The young woman is told she can't eat in the main dining room, since it is only for wealthy guests. She feels insulted and left out. But then Maxim surprises her by inviting her to have breakfast with him. For the first time, she feels relaxed and talks with him as though money and class don't matter. When she returns to her room, she finds a card from Maxim inviting her to dinner. Since Mrs. Van Hopper is still sick, she accepts. From then on, it becomes a routine. Every day, she and Maxim spend time together. They go on long drives, walk in gardens, and explore the countryside. Slowly, she begins to feel happy and free, away from Mrs. Van Hopper's control. Maxim also seems to enjoy her company, but sometimes his face looks sad, as if he is still thinking about his late wife. One day, she finds a book of poems that belonged to Rebecca, Maxim's first wife. On the first page, Rebecca had written a personal message. When she brings it up, Maxim suddenly grows cold, and she regrets saying anything. Soon after, Mrs. Van Hopper gets better and decides they must leave for England. The young woman feels heartbroken, realizing she deeply cares for Maxim. Mrs. Van Hopper notices and cruelly tells her that Maxim will never be serious about her. She says Maxim is still grieving and that the young woman is from a lower class, so she should forget him. On the day they are leaving, the young woman gathers courage and goes to Maxim to say goodbye. To her shock, he also looks upset. Then he asks her to marry him and live with him at Manderley. At first, she misunderstands and thinks he just wants her to be his secretary. But when she realizes he truly means marriage, she is overjoyed. They tell Mrs. Van Hopper about the engagement. In front of Maxim, she acts happy, but when he leaves, she turns bitter and warns the young woman that he will never forget Rebecca. After the wedding, the couple travels to Manderley. The huge house is breathtaking. The long road winds through forests and finally leads to the grand building. The staff stand in a line outside to greet their master and his new wife. Maxim quickly gets busy with work, leaving his wife to be shown around the house by Mrs. Danvers, the strict and unfriendly housekeeper. She leads the young bride through long halls and large rooms, explaining that Manderley has been in the De Winter family for hundreds of years. The young woman feels both amazed and overwhelmed. When they reach the main bedroom, the young wife asks why it doesn't have a sea view. Mrs. Danvers explains that the best rooms with sea views are in the West Wing. Those were Rebecca's rooms. The way she says it feels like a comparison. The young wife forces a smile, pretending she is fine, but inside she feels uneasy. That night, she tells her husband she wants them to share everything, even their thoughts about Rebecca. But Maxim grows cold and turns away, leaving her hurt. She falls asleep and dreams of a woman running endlessly through Manderley's halls. Waking up, she notices her husband is gone. She follows him and sees him walking through the corridors in a daze, like he is sleepwalking. Just as she is about to call him, Mrs. Danvers appears and warns her not to wake a sleepwalker. They watch as Maxim walks toward the West Wing, the part of the house that still belongs to Rebecca in memory. The next morning, Maxim acts normal, eating breakfast with his assistant. When a young woman carefully asks about his sleepwalking, he reacts sharply and leaves, making her feel even more alone. Now she spends her days wandering Manderley. The house feels silent and heavy, as if it belongs more to Rebecca's memory than to her. One day, she sees the dogs slip into the West Wing. Following the dogs, the young wife wanders into Rebecca's private study. The room feels frozen in time, as if Rebecca might walk back in at any moment. Everything has been kept carefully, elegant magazines on the tables, neatly arranged books, and Rebecca's name written beautifully in many of them. The young woman stands quietly, feeling as though the walls themselves whisper about Rebecca's life. Each detail shows style, confidence, and grace, things she feels she doesn't have. The weight of comparison makes her chest tighten, and she begins to wonder if she could ever truly belong in this house. Her hand brushes against a fragile decoration. It wobbles, tips over, and crashes to the ground. Her heart leaps in panic, afraid that someone might find out. She quickly gathers the broken bits and hides them in a drawer. In the rush, a sharp piece cuts her hand, leaving a thin line of blood. Shaken and embarrassed, she hurries to the kitchen to wrap it. Mrs. Danvers happens to be there, calmly asking what should be cooked for dinner. Flustered and unsure, the young wife blurts out that the meals Rebecca once liked should be served. Without realizing it, she once again lets Rebecca's shadow decide everything, showing just how powerless she feels in Manderley. That evening, she and Maxim walk by the sea with their dog, the salty wind brushing against their faces. The dog runs ahead, leading her toward a small cottage near the shore. The cottage feels heavy with secrets, its silence colder than the sea breeze. Inside, the air is still and eerie, like someone might be hiding there. Pulling a curtain aside, she finds a man sitting quietly. His presence startles her. He explains that he doesn't live there, only visits sometimes, and warns her not to return. The way he speaks makes it clear this cottage once belonged to Rebecca. His words about the sea are filled with sadness, and she begins to suspect that Rebecca drowned in its waters. Before she leaves, he says she is nothing like Rebecca. The words sting, settling deep inside her. When she rejoins Maxim outside, she longs to ask him about the cottage and about Rebecca's death. But Maxim turns away from her questions, and the silence between them feels heavier than ever. Soon after, Maxim's sister Beatrice and her husband arrive with their elderly grandmother. They come to welcome the new bride properly and encourage her to join Manderley's social life. Nervously, the young wife suggests holding a grand costume ball, one of Rebecca's old traditions. Beatrice and her husband are excited by the idea, but Maxim looks tense, clearly unhappy with the reminder of Rebecca. During the visit, the grandmother, who is often confused, suddenly becomes sharp when she hears Rebecca's name. She mistakes the young wife for an intruder and demands to know why she is taking Rebecca's place. The young woman feels her face burn with shame as Beatrice gently leads the old woman away. Before leaving, Beatrice admits that Rebecca had been admired by everyone, loved for her charm and beauty. These words press down on the young wife's heart, making her feel even smaller and less worthy. Later, the broken ornament from the study is mentioned, and Mrs. Danvers makes sure Maxim hears about it. The young wife bravely admits she broke it, but she notices how much power Mrs. Danvers still seems to hold, as though Rebecca controls the house through her. Troubled and in need of answers, she asks Frank, Maxim's loyal assistant, about Rebecca's death. Frank gently explains that Rebecca was an excellent sailor, but one stormy night her boat sank, and she never came back. The story only fills the young wife with more questions, but she keeps them to herself. One day, her curiosity draws her into the West Wing, where she finds Rebecca's old bedroom. The space is grand and elegant, filled with Rebecca's belongings, arranged as though she still lived there. Mrs. Danvers appears, speaking of Rebecca with passion, insisting that Maxim adored her. When asked if Maxim told her to keep the room unchanged, Mrs. Danvers coldly replies that no orders were needed. Rebecca's presence is still everywhere. Then, fixing her sharp eyes on the young wife, she says she often wonders what Rebecca would think, seeing another woman take her name as Mrs. De Winter. The cruel words pierce the young wife's heart, and she storms back to her own room, trembling with anger and sadness. That night, her dreams return. In her nightmare, she follows Maxim as he sleepwalks toward the West Wing. She reaches out to stop him, but wild plants twist around her legs, pulling her into the dark ground. She wakes in terror, the dread of the dream staying with her even in daylight. While Maxim is away in London, Rebecca's cousin Jack Fairytale suddenly arrives. He claims Mrs. Danvers invited him, though she later denies it. Jack speaks to the young wife in a way that feels too familiar and makes her uncomfortable. He even insists on taking her for a ride. When Maxim returns, the butler reports Jack's visit. Maxim becomes furious, accusing his wife of poor judgment. The young woman quickly realizes Mrs. Danvers must have twisted things to make her look bad. In anger, she tries to dismiss Mrs. Danvers from Manderley, but the housekeeper breaks down in tears, begging for another chance. Her performance seems fake, but the young wife still gives in and lets her stay. Wanting to prove herself, she begins planning the grand costume ball. Mrs. Danvers, now strangely helpful, assists her with every detail. A maid even suggests she wear a dress inspired by a portrait in the hall of a young woman in an elegant gown. Hoping to impress everyone, the young wife agrees, not knowing the trap being set for her. On the night of the ball, when she walks down the staircase in the gown, the guests fall silent. Maxim, his sister, and the others stare at her in shock. Maxim's face darkens with anger, and he orders her to change immediately. Confused and humiliated, she soon learns the painful truth. Rebecca wore the exact same gown at the last ball she hosted. Heartbroken and betrayed, the young wife realizes she has walked straight into a cruel trick carefully planned by Mrs. Danvers. Later, she learns that her dress idea was a trick meant to embarrass her. That night, she sees a strange woman again, but loses track while chasing her. As days pass, she feels more stressed. Mrs. Danvers keeps comparing her to Rebecca and makes her feel useless. Obsessed with Rebecca, she even tells the young wife to end her life, which leaves her shaken. Soon, a sunken boat is found with Rebecca's body inside, though everyone thought she was already buried. Suspicion falls on Maxim, but he disappears. The young wife finds him at the boathouse, where he reveals the truth. He never loved Rebecca. He hated her. Rebecca had affairs, including with her cousin Jack Fairytale. Maxim stayed quiet because divorce would shame his family. One night, Rebecca claimed she was pregnant and mocked him. In anger, Maxim killed her and sank her body at sea. An investigation begins. Jack Fairytale tries to blackmail Maxim, with Mrs. Danvers supporting him, saying Rebecca was pregnant. But the doctor's report shows she wasn't expecting a child. Instead, she had cancer, couldn't have children, and had little time left. Maxim is cleared. Still, Mrs. Danvers, unable to accept anyone replacing Rebecca, burns Manderley and dies in the fire. In the end, the young wife becomes stronger, no longer living in Rebecca's shadow, but stepping into her own life with confidence.